Everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today I want to go over how to prepare for your Montessori exams. Now, since I am AMI trained, this is going to pertain to those who are going through primary AMI training. This may also help people who are going through elementary training, so you can go ahead and watch this video and hopefully it helps. Now, before we get started, I just want to say that everybody's mind works differently. So when it comes to studying, when it comes to preparing for these exams, your mind might work very differently than mine. So if what you see here doesn't really work for you, don't worry. I have a couple suggestions that might help, so hang in there. Let me give you an overview first of what it is that I did, and then I'll show you how I put all these documents together to study. Let's switch over to looking at my outline forms for studying first. So right here, you're going to see that I have a sensorial exam B study sheet. Now, before you get all worried about what's on here and what's included in this, I just want to let you know that this study sheet is based on guidelines that my training institute gave me. So don't necessarily feel the need to copy this or do anything like that. Your training center is going to prepare you how they want you to study and the topics they want you to study. It's not the same every year. It's not the same for every training center. Each training center uses a little bit different terminology. They might include different topics. So really, you're going to want to wait to get those study guides from your training center before you start creating your outlines or your study format. But I'm just showing you a little glimpse of what I did to start out with the study guides I received. So this is all about exam B. This is the written exam B. So for the written exam, you have two parts. You have exam A, which really is all about theory, and then you have exam B, which is more of the practical application of theory. So what's going on inside the classroom. So for exam B, for sensorial, I had all these terms to define. Now my training institute gave me these terms, so I just wrote this outline about the sensorial area according to the topics they gave me. And I did the same thing for language. Actually, for language, I put both A and B on here. So A is really about the theory and a lot about that development of language. And then if you scroll down to part B, you're really going to talk about what it looks like in the classroom itself. So that's the difference between A and B. A is really a lot about the theory, and B, you're going to start talking about the classroom. You're really going to start talking about what it looks like inside the classroom to apply theory and actually work out the theory in real life. Here is practical life. So right here we have, let's talk about the purpose of practical life. You know, we have that adaptation and normalization, independence, the control and coordination of movement, the development of the mathematical mind, developing concentration. So we have the purpose, we have the characteristics. You're going to want to go through all your notes, you're going to want to go through your theory papers, and you're going to want to make all these notes for yourself on each topic that they hand you to study for this exam. Your study guide might look different than mine. So don't start worrying about this right now because you are going to get study guides, and it's probably best to wait until they give you those study guides to start making some of these notes for yourself. Let's switch over to math real quick. So here's my math outline, and this starts out with the purpose of the mathematics area. Thinking about the purpose of every single area is always a benefit. So whatever you're doing right now, just think about the purpose, right? So when you go into the written exam, organize the information in a way that your mind can remember. Now, I understand not everybody can think in an outline format. For me, this is how I prepare for written exams. What I do is I make an outline. I memorize the main points. I might come up with a little system to remember the points underneath the main points. And then when I get to the exam, the first thing I do is quickly sketch out my outline at the top of my paper so that I have my outline in mind before I start writing. And then I just use that as my format for writing my essay. So when I go to prepare for a written exam, I am going to memorize my outline. So I'm going to memorize those main points, right? Those are the most important things to keep in mind. And from those main points, that's when you start expanding. You just write as much as you can about each area. Now, For those of you going through training, you already know a little bit about the exams, hopefully. Hopefully your trainer has told you that the exam, I believe, is 7 questions, and you pick 4 of the 7 to write about. For those of you who are interested in Montessori training but haven't done it yet, this is a 2-day exam just for the written parts. So you'll spend 1 day on exam A, and then you'll come back and do exam B. And so you're going to write 4 essays on exam A, and you're going to write 4 essays on exam B. And it can be anything from your albums. So you really have no idea what they're going to choose or how they're going to word it. But what you need to do is follow the study guides that your training center will send to you. Make them simple, understand the main points, right? Like the purposes, the characteristics, the process, right? Like for instance, when you're talking about math, in Montessori, we always do the quantity first, right? Quantity before symbol. That's an important thing to remember. You might want to think about that when you're writing one of your exams on math. So those are the different things to keep in mind. Now I'm going to go over a little bit more of how to prepare for the written exam because it is a timed exam, and you have to make sure you don't get too much into your head that you don't have time for all 4 questions. But first, let me show you my other format that I used for preparing my study guides. So besides outline formats, I really like to use spreadsheet formats. And right here, we're going to go into some of the theory for exam A, and I'm going to show you how I organize this into a spreadsheet format. So for instance, as you can see down at this tab at the bottom, this sheet is labeled 4 planes. So this is the 4 planes of development right here. And right here I have a topic on age. I see that's not bold. Let's bold that because that's going to drive me nuts. And right here I have the age, right? And the different stages that go on. And then I have the physical characteristics of each stage, the psychological characteristics of each stage, the needs, and the prepared environment. So this is one sheet. So this is my study guide for the 4 planes of development for Montessori. So this is what I use to organize my information. So right here, I have math theory. And this really gets into the process of addition, the process of subtraction, and then we scroll across and see multiplication and division. And as you can see, I shared this sheet with my friend. So I had a friend write in her notes right beside mine. So that way we could collaborate. So if you have some friends that you can collaborate with, you know that in Google Sheets and in Google Docs and in other places, you can share your documents with your friend and you can work together to collaborate and make a very thorough study guide. But let's take a look at the process of addition right now. When we get into the process of addition, we're going to think through the entire journey of addition. Now, before we get to the actual official process of addition, you might want to think about all of the indirect preparation that we've done in the classroom. When it comes to math, we don't just start with math in the math area, do we? We start in practical life. We start with the logical sequence of steps. And then, of course, we switch over to sensorial. And how do we prepare for math in the sensorial area? We have all these different indirect preparations for math all throughout the classroom before they even get to the math area. So I want you to think about that as well, because that's really important too, is to understand the direct and indirect lessons we give that prepare the child for the process of addition. Now, when we get to the process of addition, for example, the first indirect lesson in the math area is the sandpaper numbers. And then we switch to the number rods, right? There is our first lesson. But it's not quite direct yet, is it? It is a sensorial impression of addition with the number rods. And then you get into the actual official process of addition. The first experience of addition in the math area are those collective exercises. And then we move on to the stamp game. We work on the dot game. We can do some word problems, addition snake game, addition strip board, addition cards, small bead frame, the wooden hierarchy of numbers, the large bead frame, and the fractions. This is the process of addition. This is it. So you might be asked to go through the process of addition for your written exam. What is that process? Tell me about this journey of addition that the child goes on in the primary environment. And this is what you're going to want to memorize. You're going to want to think through what's that first step? What's that first experience? And the question might be worded differently to the point where you have to think about, well, how does the child prepare for math in other areas first? You might want to put in a paragraph about that if it seems relevant. And you're going to want to know the ages. Now, this is really important for the written exam, that exam B, but it's also really, really important for your oral exams. And the reason why that is because when you do your oral exams, you're going to need to know your album backwards and forwards. They could pick out, let's say they pick out a presentation on the stamp game. And that's the presentation you draw. That's the presentation you have to give. However, they might still ask you to go through the steps and process of addition for the math area with your students. Tell me about this entire journey of addition. Even though you might get the presentation of the stamp game, they're going to ask you other questions as well. They're really going to want to know what materials come before this, what materials come after this, what's the age, what's the direct purpose, right? And I have some advice for how to study for that. I know that seems like a lot. The fact that they could just ask you anything out of the album really can be very nerve-wracking. However, I will say this, don't freak out. And I know it's easy to say that because I'm finished with my exams now and it's not weighing down on me like it was. But when it comes to doing your exams, keep in mind that your trainers want you to pass. They want you to succeed. So they are going to ask you questions, and if you miss something, if you miss some information, they're going to try and lead you back to it because they want you to pass. They really understand that you're going to be nervous and that this is really a discussion about everything you know about your albums, about what you've learned in the last 1, 2, or 3 years of taking this training. And this is really a lot about having that discussion. And I was really, really, really nervous about exams. It's something as an assistant I used to hear about all the time going through those exams, and it terrified me. It was one reason why I thought I never wanted to get my Montessori training because the exams sounded brutal. And I was really surprised when I went to my exam and I had a lot of fun. I actually really, really enjoyed it. And even though math is usually my weakest subject, I got into my math exam and my math examiner said, "Is math your favorite subject, or are you this passionate about all the Montessori subjects?" And I said, honestly, I love them all, but the Montessori math is just so beautiful. I absolutely love Montessori math. So I actually had a really great time in my exams. So hopefully that helps you feel a little bit more confident about this process. Let me switch to one more sheet. Now, I also put together these comprehensive sheets of every single lesson in my albums. So this is my language area, and to the left here is every single group in my language album. So we have spoken language, enrichment of vocabulary, writing, reading, word study, function of words, reading analysis. So right here in B and C columns, you're going to see that I have the number, the order in which the lesson takes place, and then I have the actual exercise. What is the lesson here? I've also included a section for the following exercises for this lesson. Then I have the direct purpose and the age. And that's all on one sheet. And I'm going to show you what this looks like printed off. So if you're not following me right now of what this looks like, I will show you what it looks like printed off because I did print all of this stuff off and put it in little folders. So I'm going to show you what that looks like too. But really, I just wanted to have the basic information all put together in a way I could understand, and I wanted it all on hopefully one sheet or close to one sheet. So if you scroll down here, I have all that information right there. So I have this information organized in different ways. I'll show you math really quick too. So here's the math area, and I changed the titles depending on the album because not every single column would match up precisely in every single album. So for the math area, I have the area or group such as numbers 1 to 10, the decimal system, teens, tens, and linear counting, the exploration and memorization of math facts, the passage to abstraction, and fractions. Now, it's possible that your album is labeled a little bit differently. Different training centers do that, so don't worry about the words I'm using. If your training center uses something different, that's okay, right? And again, I have the order of lessons. And then I have what is the actual initial presentation. I found that that's kind of helpful for me. You might want to organize it differently. And then I also put in what is the following exercise. And then, of course, we want to talk about direct purpose. And in math, we might also want to include the indirect purpose and the age. Now, another thing you might want to include separately in your math study guide is control of error. What is the control of error for this? If you go over to sensorial, I've done a similar thing, but I have put the control of error in separately. So for sensorial, I have my group area. I have my lesson presentations. I have the following exercises, and I decided to make a separate category for the memory games for sensorial because that's really important. And the control of error. I have the direct purpose, the indirect purpose, and the age. And I have it all on one sheet, so all of that information is right there. And then I have my practical life. And for this, I have the group area, just like normal, the exercises in order, the following exercises. And of course, for practical life, you're going to want to include a column on the point of interest because that is very special to the practical life album. That's totally different than any other album, right? So you're going to want to include that, but not so much the control of error, right? We're not really focusing on that quite as heavily in practical life, even though the control of error is very important in the practical life area, but it is a little bit different than the sensorial area or the math area, right? Because in the practical life area, the control of error is really the consequence that happens when they don't do the work correctly, right? Did they spill too much water? Did they make too many bubbles? So there are those things to consider about the control of error in the practical life area, but I did not put it as a separate column. And right here I have the direct purpose, the indirect purpose, and the age, right? So practical life, I think, is my longest one. It has the most lessons in it. So that one just keeps going. Okay, so here we are at my base 10 Montessori page, and I just want to point out real quick that I made it to 200 subscribers, so thank you so much for helping me out with that. But the reason why I'm on my page right now is to show you a video real quick. We're not going to go through the video, I just want to point it out to you. And the reason why I'm doing that is because maybe the way I have demonstrated my study materials to you doesn't make any sense. So if that is the case, if you are a very visual learner, if you're somebody who likes to draw and somebody who likes to organize their information very visually, I wanted to point out this video right here, how to create purposeful notes for visual learners with the Sketchnote system. Now, I don't use the Sketchnote system because I really do think best in terms of outline format and spreadsheet format. Those things really help my mind. And I can't draw. I'm terrible at drawing. However, I really love the Sketchnote system. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it is very helpful for people who think differently than me. And this just gives you a little overview and some resources as to how to use the Sketchnote system. So if you are more inclined to be drawing and to be organizing your information very visually, check out this video. Check out the links associated with it and figure out what is your style of organizing this information. I showed you all the information that I had to organize and all the different topics. And if that doesn't work for you, try to think of how you would take that information and make it look differently to help you. Maybe you're going to draw a lot of different pictures. Maybe you're going to use different calligraphy. Maybe that helps you learn. Maybe the way I put things together doesn't help you learn. Like, for instance, if we go here and we're talking about theory and we're talking about movement in practical life, a system of relationships. Now, right here, this is just a bunch of words. And for me, that works really well. But for you, you might actually want to draw the system of relationship. Let me change this so you can actually see it a little bit better. So right here, the system of relationship is the brain, muscles, and senses. For you, maybe writing that down in word format isn't helpful. Maybe for you, when you see the term system of relationship, you want to draw some pictures, right? Maybe these words are not helpful for you. And maybe when it goes to this note right here, movement shows personality, maybe you want to show a picture of how movement and personality are connected. Repetition, difficulty, all of this stuff has to do with a movement and practical life, right? And those can be demonstrated in a visual way instead of just writing it out in words. This helps me. It might not help you. So find your way to organize information. It doesn't have to look like this. Again, for social development, you might want to take pictures, or you might want to make a collage, or you might want to draw, or you might want to use calligraphy. So you're going to want to go through all these ideas and think about how you organize information. And it might just help you to watch this video on Sketchnotes and do some research on the Sketchnotes technique of organizing information. So I want you to think about that before you decide how to organize this information. Don't copy me just because that's easy. Really think about how your mind works, because when you think about that, when you think in terms of how your mind organizes information, you're going to understand your students a lot better too. You're going to understand when a student is having difficulty with understanding certain information in certain ways. We all learn differently. And again, don't forget that all of these notes, you can collaborate with a friend. You don't have to go through this all by yourself. Maybe you work with a friend or a group of friends and you each take a different topic. One of you takes the topic movement and practical life and you write it up. Another one takes social development. Or if you go to language, one of you really writes the process of creative writing. Again, I have notes from my friends written in here too. So I collaborated with my friends to make sure I didn't miss anything. Right here is a really great example of me not being someone who learns through visual images. I like the idea of the visual images, but this right here is language as a tree. Now it would make sense to have a tree and to label the tree with all these different parts that my trainer went through, but instead I decided for me it was actually easier to put this in a list format. So instead of drawing it, I actually wrote base of trunk. Now, most people would just draw a picture. That didn't work for me. I couldn't draw a tree if my life depended on it. It would probably look like something weird. So for me, I wrote it down. That might not make sense to anybody involved with this process. This might only ever make sense to me. So if you are not inclined to do things this way, don't do it this way. It's that easy, right? So what you're going to want to do is think about the way you organize information. Now, let's get back to that idea of a written exam. And when it comes to this written exam, like I said, they are timed tests. So how do you prepare for that? If you're really great at writing, but not great at managing your time, this exam will be difficult for you. If you're really great at managing your time, but you're terrible at writing, this exam will also be difficult for you. So how do you compensate for those two things? Well, the first thing is organizing your information in a way that you understand. Now, we've already talked about how I like this outline format, and I sketch a little outline at the top of my paper before I begin my written exams. And maybe for you, you're going to go through and draw a few pictures that help you remember key characteristics or purposes of each area that you're writing on. But the other way to prepare for this exam is to time yourself. Draw 4 topics out of a bag. Maybe one topic is writing about the purposes in sensorial. Maybe the other one is, talk about the 2 stages of development for language. And then how about how does practical life develop concentration? Make that another topic. And then for math, maybe talk about the characteristics of math. So let's say you pick out 4 topics from a bag to write on. And this is just for a practice written exam. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take the time that they give to you, make sure you understand and know how much time you're going to have for the entire writing process. And you know you have to write 4 essays. And for those 4 essays and the time allotted, you're going to want to divide up that time that you have into 4 parts. So you might want to practice writing about certain topics. For instance, pick 4 random questions from your study guides and give yourself 15 minutes each to write about each topic. So for instance, you might get characteristics of practical life, and then make a little note as to what are the characteristics of practical life. And what you would want to do for that is come back to your notes, right? You want to have this outline somehow in your head, either visually or in this outline format. You're going to talk about the real activities, break it into a couple different paragraphs, right? So when it comes to writing this, you're going to want to start with, first of all, intro paragraph. And then you're going to want to break down into real activities, and you're going to want to expand on that. What are the real activities, right? We're not pretending here. They're real activities. And then you're going to want to talk about natural materials. Well, what does that mean, natural materials? It means, let's talk about metal, wood, real, breakable. And so all those things are going to end up in your essay. So when it comes to practicing for this exam, just get to your document, practice writing all these things, practice writing, point of interest. Just write down everything you can think of. Write down that it is a place where you have normalization and adaptation, builds the community, and prepares the child for later life. And so this is kind of what I do to prepare for it. So I might have a little outline here. So I might put it in an outline format like this, right? So if you're doing your exams in person, you're going to be writing on paper with pencil. If you're doing it via distance, you might have the luxury of being able to write on a computer, which for me is a lot better. I type a lot better and a lot faster than I do writing by hand. So that would be a benefit for me. It might not be a benefit for everybody. But anyways, before you get into writing your essay, get your thoughts organized. Make sure to organize the information. Understand your time limits for each section. So here is your first outline for your first written exam. Maybe you want to give yourself 10 to 15 minutes to write this. Usually, whatever time I have, I don't use up the full time per question. So let's say I have an hour and a half to write about my 4 essays. What I would do is I would break up each essay question into about 15 minutes to write. So I would make sure and have something to time myself so that I understood I have 15 minutes to write. So if I have 4 questions and I have 15 minutes to write each one, that still gives me a half an hour to go back and edit, to go back and read through, to go back and fix any mistakes or add any relevant information. So that's how I like to organize my time. Let's say you want to give yourself 15 minutes to write, and then maybe 10 minutes to edit. However you want to organize your time. It really depends on how you write, how easily you write, how much time you need, and how much anxiety you have over making mistakes. But the thing you don't want to do is get stuck on this first question and spend 45 minutes on this first question and then move on to your second question. Let's say that is the process of addition, right? And only have like 5 minutes to write and 2 minutes to edit. You don't want that. So that's why wherever you get to in these 15 minutes of writing on this topic, stop. Tell yourself to stop and move on. Give yourself 15 minutes here. And make sure you have enough time at the very end built in for editing. Build in time at the end to go back and fix any mistakes. Now, you might be the type of person that you don't want to think about it. When this is ended, you don't want to think about this at all. So maybe instead, you just say, I'm going to do 20 minutes, and wherever I'm at 20 minutes, I'm going to do nothing, and I'm going to give myself 0 minutes to edit at the very end. If that's how you work, go for it. You know, that it is your exam, you organize the information. But the truth is, you don't really know if this is going to be the right amount of time unless you practice, right? So practice pulling topics out of your albums, out of your study notes. Practice that. Practice writing for 15 minutes. Do you like the feeling of not having any time left to write or edit at the very end? So give yourself the sensorial impression of taking the written exam and understand what feels right to you. So that's some of my best information that I have for you on writing the exam. Now, I also want to make sure and show you the actual copies that I printed out and how I organized them. So I'm going to switch over to my phone and I'm going to show you a little bit about the information that I organized and how I organized it. This folder is all about my theory study sheets. So this is my practical life area right here. And as you can see, I just have every single lesson in the practical life album listed. I just want to know my album backwards and forwards. And of course, the following exercises. And then here's some study questions. Why do we call it practical life, right? Because it's based on culture, mimicking the adult, helps the child adapt, and it's familiar, right? So I have different questions like that in here. So this is the study guide. Now this study guide is based on what my training center gave me. So don't worry about copying it. You're going to get your own. And then I did the same thing for sensorial, language, math. And at the end here, I have all my theory questions. Again, this is some of the papers that my training center gave me. And I just answered the questions and put them into a little folder. And then the other thing I did, I decided to make shortcut albums. And like I said, these are kind of messy because they're mine and I just made some quick notes for myself. They weren't meant to be published. And what I did with my shortcut albums is that I took every single lesson in all of my albums and I put them in 10 steps or less. Again, it's just very simple steps. It's not the full lesson. This isn't how I wrote my albums. And really, it was just, what is the main point? What are the main steps? And sometimes I drew pictures, and this is why I don't draw pictures. This is a hand, by the way. Yeah, that's what that was. As you can see, this is why I stick to outline format. And if you see the underline here, that just meant that when it came time for exams, this is definitely going to be one of the lessons that my training center included in the possibilities. As you get closer to exams, your trainer will let you know what specifically to focus on and what you don't have to focus on. However, just because arranging flowers is on the exam, but setting a table or cutting a banana isn't, doesn't mean you don't have to know it, because they might say, okay, present to me arranging flowers. And then once you're done, they're going to have a discussion with you and they're going to ask you, okay, well, what is the lesson that directly follows arranging flowers? What comes before arranging flowers? You know, what can you tell me about this entire area of the album, right? What can you tell me about care of the environment? What can you tell me about care of self? What comes before and after this area in the practical life album? So you're not off the hook. And now I want to show you how those forms turned out. So when it comes to those spreadsheets that I showed you, this is what it looks like when it printed out. This one has, because it's practical life, it has a ton. And so I have everything listed here, right? Just those main points. Create a sheet for yourself that just goes over those specific points. So right here, we're looking at my math album. And to start with, this is the sheet that I showed you online with the different process of fractions, the decimal system, process of 1 through 10. We can also look at the process of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, all of that. So that's all printed out. So I can look at that and I can go through that. And you know, you might want to practice with a friend and just say, okay, tell me about the process of addition. And just pick different things out of a bag, out of a hat, out of a bowl. Just pick different topics for each other and ask yourself to recite it. If you don't have a friend, then just recite it to yourself, and that's okay too. And then right here, I have my math album as I showed you on the spreadsheet with all the lessons and the different parts of the lesson to remember, because you're going to be asked about these things. And then my shortcut album. So everything in my math album, I condensed down to 10 steps or less. And if it helps, you know, just have your math diagrams handy. Sometimes it's helpful just to look at the pictures. These are the ones that didn't make it into my album. That's usually because it has an error on it somewhere. And there's my math chart, my finger charts. And so I had to create all these. And that means I had a lot of mistakes and I had to reprint them a lot. So I had all these extra images that I could use, and I just put those with my study albums too. And I just would write what's wrong with it. And so I would make a note of how to correct it, and I would just keep them for studying. Now, because you're going to print out a lot of paper, my suggestion is that you get an inkwell printer. I have the Epson EcoTank, and it was the best thing for training. They might be a little bit pricier, but the fact that you go through just a ton of ink printing out these albums, it's going to be worth it to get something like the EcoTank. So here are all my albums right here. As you can see, it stacks pretty tall when they're all put together. That's a lot of information you have to remember just to get through your exams. That's why I created these shortcut albums. I could take them anywhere. I could keep them with me. They were easy to look up. You're going to want to take all this information and organize it into a format that's easy and adaptable for how you understand things. But one of the best things I can say as far as preparing for exams is that I really didn't feel like everything started coming together until I finished my albums. So before you get too worried about exams, my best advice is to finish your albums. Get that done. Then worry about, how do I take this information and make it easy for my brain to remember, to process? How do I organize that information in a simple way that I can talk about it, that I can remember it easier? You have your albums for all those little details that you need. This isn't going to work for everything, but it's certainly going to help you remember everything a lot better. So you're going to want to take all this information and you're going to want to put it into an easy format for you. But first, focus on finishing these albums. Focus on getting this done, making this beautiful, and then worry about organizing the information. So this should come second to finishing your albums, because without finishing your albums, this really can't happen very efficiently. Get this out of the way, and then you're going to have a lot more time to spend on organizing information. So this comes first, this comes second. Get this done, then organize it. Keep organizing the information over and over again until it finally clicks. So that's my best advice for today. Hopefully that helps. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.